It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I stumbled upon the shattering truth. The kind of day that, on the surface, seemed as ordinary as any other. I had come home early from work, hoping to catch up on some much-needed rest before the evening's meetings. I was exhausted. My mind was plagued with the relentless stress of upcoming deadlines and the constant pressure to maintain the high standards that had become synonymous with my name. Little did I know, today's interruption would not be about work. Entering the apartment, I noticed something unusual. Moni's laptop, usually tucked away in her study, was left open on the kitchen counter. Her phone, a sleek new model she'd recently purchased, was perched beside it. A pang of irritation flared up in me as I recalled our earlier conversation. She had promised to keep her work things off the dining table. But today, that irritation was soon overshadowed by a gnawing sense of unease. I walked over, intending to close the laptop and put it back in its rightful place. As I approached, the screen blinked with an incoming message notification. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity, stronger than my better judgment, got the better of me. I clicked on the message preview, revealing a conversation that made my blood run cold. The messages were from Josh. "Hey, Monica, can't wait to see you tonight. I've missed you more than you can imagine." "Me too. I'm counting down the minutes. We need to be careful, though. Thomas will be home early today." My heart pounded in my chest, each beat feeling like a sledgehammer. My hands trembled as I scrolled up through the conversation. It became painfully clear that my wife was involved in a relationship with my best friend. The messages were filled with flirtatious banter and intimate plans. They spoke of late-night rendezvous, stolen moments, and a level of intimacy that was reserved for someone who was supposed to be my closest confidant and partner. I felt as though the ground had been yanked out from under me. My mind raced, replaying every interaction with Josh over the past few months, every moment I had brushed off as benign, every laugh, every shared drink. They had been lies, a facade. My world was crumbling, and I was left standing in the wreckage. I needed to see it for myself. I grabbed my phone and dialed Josh's number, my hands still shaking. The call rang and rang, finally answered with a sleepy, "Hello?" Josh's voice was calm, almost too calm. I wanted to scream at him, demand answers, but I couldn't. I simply hung up and stared blankly at the screen. The apartment felt stifling. I took deep, steadying breaths, trying to quell the storm inside me. I thought of confronting them immediately, of barging into our shared spaces and confronting them about their betrayal. But, as the initial wave of anger subsided, I felt a cold clarity settle over me. I could feel the dangerous pull of vengeance whispering in my ear, promising satisfaction but also hinting at the chaos it would bring. I decided not to confront them directly. Instead, I needed to think this through carefully. My mind was already working overtime, and I knew that acting in anger would only cloud my judgment. The revelation was a brutal blow, but I had to process it with a clear head. I shut the laptop and walked away from the kitchen, my footsteps echoing in the empty apartment. The walls, once comforting and familiar, now seemed alien and cold. I needed time to plan my next steps, to figure out how to deal with the wreckage of my personal life without letting my emotions drive me into a reckless decision. In the solitude of my office, I sat down at my desk, staring at the blank screen in front of me. My architectural projects, which had once been a source of pride and fulfillment, now seemed distant and insignificant. My mind was consumed by the betrayal and the aching void left by the loss of trust. The skyscraper I had been designing, a symbol of ambition and success, now seemed like a sanctuary, a place where I could channel my rage and my heartbreak into something concrete and lasting. My emotions, raw and volatile, would not dictate my actions. Instead, I resolved to focus on my work, using it as a means to regain control and purpose amid this personal catastrophe. The day had started as routine, but it had ended with my life being irrevocably altered. As I looked out the window at the sprawling city below, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The betrayal was a dark cloud over my life, but I was determined to confront it with a calculated, measured response. The days following my discovery of Monica's betrayal were a blur, marked by a hollow emptiness that clung to me like a second skin. The anger and pain still simmered beneath the surface, but I knew I couldn't afford to let them consume me. I had to channel these emotions into something constructive, something that would remind me of who I was before everything fell apart. That's when I decided to immerse myself fully into my work, the one area of my life where I still had complete control. My latest project had been in its early stages, a concept for a skyscraper that would redefine New York City's skyline. It was ambitious, even by my standards, a towering edifice of steel and glass that would symbolize not just progress and innovation, but resilience and strength. I poured myself into it, working late into the night, the blueprints sprawled out across my desk like a map to salvation. Each line I drew on the paper, and each calculation I made, was a way to push the thoughts of Monica and Josh further from my mind. The skyscraper became more than just a building, it became my refuge. It was a place where I could lose myself, where the precision and logic of architecture could drown out the chaos of my personal life. I envisioned the structure rising from the earth, its sleek form piercing the sky, a testament to endurance in the face of adversity. The design was unlike anything I had ever attempted before. I wanted it to be both modern and timeless, a structure that would stand as a beacon of hope and renewal. The foundation would be solid, unyielding, and able to weather any storm. The facade, composed of intricate patterns of glass and steel, would reflect the changing light of the city, making the building seem alive, dynamic, and ever-changing. In my mind, this skyscraper was more than just a project, it was a metaphor for my own life. I had been shaken to my core, but like this building, I intended to rise stronger and more resilient than ever before. The work consumed me, and I welcomed it. I found solace in the precise measurements and the mathematical certainty that architecture provided. There was no room for betrayal or heartbreak here, only angles, forces, and materials working in harmony. The office became my sanctuary. I spent hours refining every detail, from the smallest structural components to the grandest aesthetic flourishes. I consulted with engineers, designers, and other experts, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. My team, sensing my intensity, rallied behind the vision, unaware of the personal turmoil driving me. To them, I was simply a man possessed by an idea, a relentless architect chasing perfection. Yet, there were moments when the facade cracked, when thoughts of Monica and Josh crept into my mind. Late at night, when the city was quiet and my team had gone home, I would sit alone in the dimly lit office, staring at the plans. The skyscraper, as much as it was a distraction, was also a reminder of why I was here, of the betrayal that had led me to this point. But I pushed those thoughts aside, refusing to let them take root. As the weeks passed, the design evolved, growing more complex and more ambitious. I began to see the skyscraper not just as a project, but as a legacy. It would stand long after I was gone, a monument to my resilience, to the man who had faced devastation and come out the other side stronger. My colleagues began to notice the change in me. They saw how I threw myself into the work with a fervor that bordered on obsession. They marveled at the speed and precision with which I worked, at the way I seemed to know exactly what I wanted, even when the rest of the world was uncertain. But they didn't question it. They respected the drive and the passion, even if they didn't fully understand its origins. At night, when I finally allowed myself to leave the office, the city felt different. It was the same New York, with its towering buildings and bustling streets, but now I saw it through the lens of my project. I imagined how my skyscraper would fit into this urban landscape, how it would stand out yet blend seamlessly with the city's iconic skyline. I pictured people looking up at it, awed by its presence, and feeling the same sense of determination and strength that I had poured into its design. There was a strange comfort in knowing that, no matter what happened in my personal life, this building would endure. It would be my mark on the world, a way to reclaim control over something when everything else seemed to be slipping away. I didn't need revenge, not anymore. I needed to create, to build something that would outlast the pain and the betrayal. And so, I worked. I designed. I built. With every day that passed, the skyscraper grew more real in my mind, and with it, the pain began to dull. The work didn't erase what had happened, but it gave me a reason to keep going, to focus on something greater than myself. It reminded me that, even in the face of heartbreak, I could still create something beautiful, something lasting. In the end, this skyscraper would be my revenge, not against Monica or Josh, but against the despair that had threatened to consume me. It would stand tall, proud, and unbreakable, just as I intended to be. The evening of the business gala was one I would have preferred to skip, but obligations in my line of work rarely offered that luxury. It was one of those events where everyone who mattered in the city's architecture and development scene gathered, an opulent affair held in a grand ballroom. with crystal chandeliers casting a soft, golden glow over the crowd. I hadn't attended with the intention of socializing. In truth, I was there more out of necessity than desire. My mind was still consumed with the Skyscraper project, but I knew that maintaining connections was just as crucial to my success as the work itself. I drifted through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with colleagues and clients, but my heart wasn't in it. The conversations felt hollow, the smiles forced. I longed to be back in my office, surrounded by blueprints and models, where I could lose myself in the precision and control of my work. Here, amidst the laughter and chatter, I felt like an outsider. It was during a lull in the evening, while I was nursing a glass of whiskey at the bar, that I first noticed him. Mark stood a few feet away, leaning against the bar with a contemplative expression. He looked as out of place as I felt, his gaze distant, as if he were somewhere else entirely. There was something about him that caught my attention. Perhaps it was the way he seemed detached from the festivities. Or maybe it was the unmistakable air of someone who had seen his share of hardship. Our eyes met briefly, and he nodded in acknowledgement. I returned the gesture, raising my glass slightly in a silent toast. There was something unspoken at that moment, a shared understanding that neither of us needed to articulate. I turned back to my drink, but before long, I felt a presence beside me. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice calm and steady, tinged with a hint of weariness. "Not at all," I replied, motioning to the empty seat next to me. He slid onto the bar stool, ordering a drink for himself. We sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the gala fading into the background. There was no need for small talk, we both seemed content to simply sit in each other's company. "I've seen you around at these events," Mark said eventually, breaking the silence. "Thomas, right? The architect." I nodded. "That's right. And you are?" "Mark," he replied. "Mark Reynolds. I'm in real estate development." Nice to meet you," I said, though the words felt perfunctory. I wasn't in the mood for idle conversation, but something about Mark intrigued me. There was a depth to him, a sense of quiet strength that piqued my curiosity. We lapsed into silence again, sipping our drinks. Finally, Mark spoke, his tone thoughtful. "You don't seem like you're here for the socializing." I gave a half smile, acknowledging the truth in his observation. "Neither do you." He chuckled softly, a sound devoid of humor. "Touché." Another pause, then he continued, "These events, they can feel pretty empty when you're dealing with something heavy." His words hung in the air between us, and I felt an odd sense of relief that he had voiced what I had been feeling. I turned to look at him more closely, noticing the lines of strain etched into his face, the way his shoulders slumped slightly as if burdened by an invisible weight. "You seem like someone who knows what that's like," I said, my voice low. Mark sighed, swirling his drink in his glass. "Yeah, you could say that. It's not easy, is it? Keeping up appearances when everything else is falling apart." I didn't respond immediately, but his words resonated with me. He wasn't just making small talk, he was speaking from experience. There was a raw honesty in his voice that made me want to listen, to hear his story. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. I wasn't usually one to pry into other people's lives. But something told me that Mark's story might hold a mirror to my own. Mark glanced at me as if weighing whether to share. Then he nodded, taking a deep breath. "My wife," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion. She cheated on me. With someone I trusted, someone I considered a friend. It blindsided me, you know? I never saw it coming." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. It was as if he had spoken the very thoughts that had been tormenting me for weeks. I felt a surge of empathy. A connection forged in shared pain. "How did you find out?" I asked quietly. "She wasn't careful," Mark said bitterly. "I stumbled upon some texts, the kind that makes it pretty damn obvious what's going on. At first, I couldn't believe it. I wanted to confront her, to get answers, but I didn't. I decided to wait, to see how deep it went." I nodded, understanding all too well the internal battle between the urge to confront and the need to process. "And what did you do?" "I buried myself in work," he admitted. "At first, it was just to keep from thinking about it. But then, I realized something. I could use the pain, to push myself further. I started focusing on a new project, something big, something that would outshine anything I'd done before. It became my way of coping, of proving to myself that I could come out stronger on the other side." His words mirrored my thoughts and my approach to dealing with Monica's betrayal. I had thrown myself into the Skyscraper project for the same reasons, to escape. To prove something to myself, to regain control over my life. I'm working on something too, I found myself saying. A skyscraper. It's become my anchor, I guess. The one thing I can focus on that makes sense. Mark looked at me, his eyes filled with understanding. Yeah, I get that. It's like you're building something solid, something unbreakable because everything else feels so damn fragile. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared experiences settling between us. It was strange, but comforting, to find someone who understood what I was going through without needing a lengthy explanation. Mark didn't offer empty platitudes or superficial advice, he simply shared his story, and in doing so, gave me a sense of solidarity. Have you thought about what comes next? Mark asked after a while. I mean, beyond the work. What happens when the project is finished? The question lingered in the air, and I realized I hadn't considered it. The skyscraper had become my whole world. But what would I do when it was done? Would I still feel this emptiness, this gnawing sense of betrayal? I don't know, I admitted. I guess I've been too focused on the present to think that far ahead. Mark nodded as if he had anticipated my answer. I didn't either, at first. But eventually, you have to figure out what you want beyond the work. Otherwise, you're just running. His words struck a chord, but I wasn't ready to delve into the future yet. For now, the work was enough. It had to be. Thanks for sharing your story, I said, my voice sincere. It helps, knowing I'm not the only one dealing with this. Mark smiled faintly, a weary expression that spoke of battles fought and wounds still healing. We all deal with it in our way. Just remember, the work can only take you so far. Don't lose sight of what's important. I nodded, absorbing his advice, even if I wasn't sure I was ready to act on it. The night wore on, and we eventually parted ways, but Mark's words stayed with me. In a room full of people who barely knew me, I had found an unexpected ally, someone who understood the turmoil beneath my composed exterior. As I left the gala, the skyscraper still loomed large in my mind, but now, it was accompanied by something else, an awareness that, no matter how much I tried to distance myself from the pain, I couldn't ignore it forever. Mark had shown me that there was more to healing than just throwing myself into work, and though I wasn't sure what that meant for me yet, I knew it was something I needed to consider. For now, though, I would keep building, keep focusing, and let the rest unfold in its own time. The days after my conversation with Mark were filled with an unsettling mix of clarity and confusion. His words stayed with me, echoing in the quiet moments when I was alone with my thoughts. I found myself replaying his story, the way he had channeled his pain into something productive, but also how he had hinted at the need for something more. Something beyond the work. But it wasn't just the idea of moving on that lingered in my mind. There was something else, something darker, simmering beneath the surface. It was the thought of revenge, a concept I had pushed aside in the immediate aftermath of discovering Monica's betrayal, but now it was creeping back into my consciousness, refusing to be ignored. Revenge. The word itself felt both foreign and familiar, like a shadowy figure lurking at the edge of my thoughts. I had never considered myself a vengeful person. But there was something about the idea that intrigued me, something that promised a sense of justice, of balance being restored. Mark had shown me that I wasn't alone in my pain, and if he could find a way to use that pain to his advantage, then perhaps I could too. I began to entertain the thought more seriously, letting it take root and grow in the fertile soil of my anger and betrayal. It wasn't enough to simply move on, to let Monica and Josh carry on with their lives as if nothing had happened. They had taken something from me, my trust, my sense of security, and I wanted to take something back. But how? The question gnawed at me, even as I tried to focus on my work. The skyscraper, once my sanctuary, now felt like a reminder of my helplessness. I could build the tallest, most impressive structure in the city, but it wouldn't change the fact that Monica had betrayed me, that Josh had betrayed me. I needed something more tangible, something that would make them feel the same pain they had inflicted on me. As the idea of revenge solidified in my mind, I knew I couldn't do it alone. I didn't have the experience or the knowledge of how to craft a plan that would truly hurt them where it counted. But Mark had been through this before. He understood the intricacies of betrayal, the way it could be turned into a weapon. If anyone could help me devise a plan, it was him. The next time I saw Mark, it was at a small, upscale bar in Midtown. We had agreed to meet for a drink, ostensibly to catch up after the gala. But I had a different agenda in mind. I arrived early, choosing a quiet booth in the corner where we wouldn't be disturbed. The dim lighting and soft jazz playing in the background created an atmosphere of intimacy, perfect for the conversation I intended to have. Mark arrived a few minutes later, his expression relaxed, but there was a keen alertness in his eyes that told me he hadn't completely moved on from his ordeal. As he slid into the seat across from me, I could see that same underlying tension I had noticed at the gala. A subtle sign that his wounds were still healing. We exchanged pleasantries, ordered drinks, and for a while, we talked about work, the latest developments in the city, and our shared interest in architecture. But eventually, I steered the conversation toward the topic that had been on my mind since our last meeting. "Mark," I began, keeping my tone casual, "I've been thinking a lot about what you told me at the gala. About how you dealt with everything that happened." He took a sip of his whiskey, his gaze sharpening as he studied me. "Yeah? And what have you been thinking?" "I guess I've been wondering if there's more I could do," I said carefully. "Something beyond just focusing on work. Something that would make me feel like I'm not just letting them get away with it." Mark didn't respond immediately, but I could see the gears turning in his mind. He set his glass down and leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing as he considered my words. "Are you talking about revenge?" he asked, his voice low and measured. I nodded, feeling a mix of apprehension and excitement at finally giving voice to the thought. "Yeah, I think I am." Mark was silent for a moment, then he leaned forward, his expression serious. "Revenge is a tricky thing, Thomas. It can give you a sense of satisfaction, sure, but it can also consume you if you're not careful." "I'm aware of the risks," I replied. "But I also know that I can't just let this go. Not after everything they've done." He studied me for a long time as if weighing the sincerity of my words. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, let's talk about it. What are you thinking?" I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This was it. The moment where the idea would either take shape or wither away. I leaned in closer, lowering my voice as I spoke. "I want to make them feel what I felt," I said, my voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "But I don't want to be reckless. I need a plan. Something that will hit them where it hurts the most, without leaving me vulnerable." Mark nodded, listening intently. "You need to think strategically. Revenge isn't just about lashing out. It's about precision, timing, and knowing your enemy's weaknesses. If you go into this blindly, you'll end up doing more damage to yourself than to them." His words resonated with me, reinforcing the idea that this needed to be calculated, not impulsive. I couldn't afford to let my emotions drive my actions. I had to approach this with the same meticulous planning that I used in my work. "What do you suggest?" I asked, eager to hear his thoughts. Mark took a moment to consider before he spoke. "First, you need to identify what they value most. For Monica, it could be her reputation or her social standing. For Josh, it might be his career and his connections in the art world. Once you know what they care about, you can start to think about how to target those things." I nodded, the pieces starting to fall into place in my mind. "So, we find their weak spots and exploit them." "Exactly," Mark said, "but you have to be patient. This isn't something you can rush. You need to gather information, understand their vulnerabilities, and then strike when the time is right." His advice made sense, and I could feel a plan beginning to take shape. I knew Monica well, her ambitions, her need for social validation. And Josh, with his fragile ego and the precarious nature of his artistic career, had plenty of vulnerabilities that could be exploited. "I can help you with this," Mark continued, his tone conspiratorial. "I've been through it, and I've learned a lot along the way. We can come up with something that will make them think twice before they ever cross someone like you again." I felt a surge of gratitude and determination. Mark's offer of assistance was exactly what I needed. A partner who understood the stakes, someone who could guide me through the complexities of crafting a plan that would deliver the impact I wanted. "Thank you, Mark," I said, my voice filled with genuine appreciation. "I'd appreciate your help." He nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "We'll take it one step at a time. No rush, no mistakes. We'll make sure they get what they deserve." As we clinked glasses, sealing our agreement, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The skyscraper was still my anchor, my refuge, but now, it was more than that. It was a symbol of the strength I would need to carry out this plan. With Mark by my side, I was confident that we could devise a strategy that would bring Monica and Josh to their knees, without sacrificing my integrity in the process. The road ahead would be challenging, and I knew there would be moments of doubt, of second guessing. But as I looked across the table at Mark, I felt a sense of solidarity, a bond forged in the fires of betrayal and tempered by the desire for justice. Revenge was no longer just a thought, it was a goal, one that I was now committed to achieving. With our pact sealed, Mark and I got to work. Our aim was clear: dismantle Josh's life without leaving any trace back to us. We decided to target his career and financial stability, the two pillars that held up his world. Mark was strategic, urging me to think about Josh's vulnerabilities. His art is his pride. If we can ruin his reputation, we can make everything else crumble. We brainstormed relentlessly, identifying key areas to attack. We knew the art world was fickle. One scandal, one bad review could destroy years of hard work. We planned to subtly spread rumors, question his integrity as an artist, and create doubts among his patrons. Next, we turned our focus to his finances. Josh wasn't financially savvy, often spending more than he earned. We devised ways to push him deeper into debt, knowing that financial pressure would force him into desperate, career-damaging decisions. Our plan was cunning and thorough. Every detail was calculated, and every potential risk was minimized. We were ready to strike. The first step was to gather as much information about Josh as possible. We needed to know his weaknesses, his routines, and his connections. Mark used his contacts in the art world, posing as a potential investor to extract information about Josh's finances and upcoming projects. Meanwhile, I reconnected with mutual acquaintances, carefully probing for details about his personal life and current standing in the community. We learned that Josh was indeed struggling financially, living beyond his means in hopes of a future windfall. His reputation, while solid, had a few cracks that we could exploit. With this intel, we began refining our plan, confident that we had found the perfect pressure points to bring him down. The moment of action had arrived. Mark and I had spent weeks meticulously crafting our plan, and now it was time to set it into motion. The first step was to target Josh's financial stability, a weak spot we knew would unravel him if pushed hard enough. We began by spreading rumors among key players in the art world, gallery owners, collectors, and critics, that Josh was in desperate need of cash. Mark, using his connections, subtly implied that Josh was looking to sell his work at a loss, hinting that his recent projects were not living up to expectations. This planted seeds of doubt in the minds of potential buyers, causing them to hesitate and question the value of his art. At the same time, we orchestrated a series of minor financial setbacks for Josh. An anonymous tip to the IRS triggered an audit, leading to unexpected tax complications. We also made sure that a few of his more lucrative commissions fell through. With Mark spreading the word that Josh was unreliable and difficult to work with. The cumulative effect of these actions created a ripple of financial instability, forcing Josh to scramble to make ends meet. The next phase involved tarnishing Josh's reputation in the public eye. We fabricated stories of unprofessional behavior, subtly feeding these lies to the right people, those who were quick to gossip and eager to see a successful figure falter. Social media became our weapon of choice, where anonymous posts hinted at Josh's supposed arrogance and lack of integrity. The art world, always quick to turn on its own, began to view Josh with suspicion, and his once loyal supporters started to distance themselves. As the pressure mounted, Josh's frustration became evident. His normally confident demeanor began to crack, revealing a man struggling to keep his life from falling apart. He started making desperate decisions, selling his artwork for far less than it was worth, agreeing to projects he would have once dismissed as beneath him, and losing the respect of his peers in the process. Amidst all this turmoil, Monica began to notice changes in Josh. He was no longer the carefree, charismatic man she had fallen for. Instead, he became increasingly irritable and withdrawn, the strain of his crumbling life evident in every aspect of his behavior. His once steady hands, so confident with a paintbrush, now trembled with anxiety. He was constantly on edge, snapping at the smallest inconveniences, and spending sleepless nights worrying about his dwindling finances. Monica, who had been so certain of her choices, started to feel the repercussions of our plan. Her affair with Josh, once an exciting escape, had turned into a source of stress and guilt. She noticed the tension in his voice during their conversations, The way he avoided discussing his work, and the growing distance between them. The man she had risked everything for was no longer the charming, successful artist she admired, but a shadow of his former self, consumed by the problems that we had carefully orchestrated. As Josh's situation worsened, Monica's own life began to unravel. She found herself worrying more about his problems than enjoying the relationship that had once been her refuge from an unhappy marriage. The thrill of their affair was replaced by a creeping dread, a fear that she had made a terrible mistake. She started to suspect that something was wrong, something beyond mere bad luck or coincidence. The thought gnawed at her, keeping her awake at night as she tried to piece together the changes she saw in Josh. Monica's stress began to manifest in her work and social life. She became more irritable and more prone to snapping at colleagues and friends. Her once flawless composure cracked as the guilt and fear took hold, making her question every decision she had made. She could sense that something was slipping through her fingers, something she couldn't control, and it terrified her. Despite her suspicions, Monica couldn't pinpoint the source of Josh's troubles. She didn't know that every misstep, every piece of bad luck, was part of a carefully crafted plan. All she knew was that the man she had chosen over her husband was falling apart, and with him, so was the life she had envisioned for herself. As the consequences of our plan continued to unfold, Monica was left to grapple with the growing realization that the affair she had thought would bring her happiness was instead leading her down a path of uncertainty and despair. What had started as a meticulously calculated plan was now beginning to spiral out of control. Mark and I had orchestrated every detail to bring Josh down, but we hadn't anticipated the full impact it would have, not just on him, but on everyone involved, including Monica. As Josh's life continued to unravel, he became more desperate and erratic in his attempts to regain control. His financial troubles worsened, and the strain of it all took a toll on his mental state. He began lashing out, not just at those around him, but at Monica as well. Their once passionate affair turned toxic, filled with arguments and blame. The stress of their situation pushed them both to the edge, and instead of finding comfort in each other, they found only more conflict. Monica, realizing the gravity of the situation, began to seek ways to help Josh fix his problems. She reached out to some of his old contacts, trying to secure new opportunities for him, but her efforts were met with resistance. The rumors and bad press we had carefully planted had taken root, and no one wanted to be associated with Josh anymore. His reputation was in tatters, and every door she tried to open for him was firmly shut. Desperation led them both to make rash decisions. Josh, in a last-ditch effort to save his career, took on a project that was far beyond his capabilities. It was a high-profile commission that required not just artistic talent but also a level of financial investment that he simply couldn't afford. Monica, in a bid to support him, liquidated some of her assets, putting herself in a precarious financial position as well. They were both teetering on the brink of ruin, and the pressure was unbearable. The tension between them reached a boiling point during one particularly heated argument. Monica accused Josh of dragging her down with him, of ruining the life she had risked everything to build. Josh, in turn, lashed out at her, blaming her for pushing him into decisions that had only worsened his situation. Their relationship, once filled with passion, was now a battleground of accusations and regret. Meanwhile, Mark and I watched from the sidelines, feeling the situation slip through our fingers. What we had intended as a precise, controlled act of vengeance was now a chaotic mess. Josh was a man on the edge, and Monica, once confident and composed, was unraveling alongside him. The fallout of our plan was more severe than we had anticipated, and it was becoming clear that we were no longer in control. The crisis reached its peak when Josh, overwhelmed by the weight of his failures, made a public scene at a gallery event. He had been drinking heavily, trying to drown his sorrows, and when a critic made an offhand comment about his recent work, Josh snapped. He launched into a tirade, denouncing the art world, accusing his peers of conspiring against him, and ultimately destroying any remaining shred of his reputation. It was a disastrous moment, one that was caught on camera and quickly spread across social media. Sealing his fate, Monica, horrified by what she had witnessed, realized that there was no salvaging the situation. She was now tied to a man who was not only losing everything but also dragging her down with him. The life she had envisioned was crumbling before her eyes, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. In the aftermath of Josh's public meltdown, I found myself alone in my office, staring out at the New York City skyline. The skyscraper I had been designing was finally taking shape, a towering symbol of everything I had poured my energy into. But as I looked at it, I felt a hollowness that I hadn't anticipated. The plan I had devised with Mark had succeeded beyond our wildest expectations, but the satisfaction I had hoped to feel was absent. Instead, I was left with a deep sense of emptiness. Watching Josh and Monica self-destruct had brought no joy, only a bitter aftertaste that lingered long after the fact. Mark and I had driven Josh to the brink, and in doing so, we had unleashed forces we couldn't control. The chaos that ensued was far beyond what I had imagined, and it made me realize that revenge, no matter how justified it seemed, was a destructive force, one that consumed not just its target but also those who wielded it. As I sat there, reflecting on everything that had happened, I felt a profound sense of clarity. I had been so focused on destroying Josh that I had lost sight of what truly mattered. My work, the skyscraper that was rising from the ground, was where I had always found my true passion. My sense of purpose. And in pursuing revenge, I had neglected the very thing that brought me peace. I decided then that it was time to let go of the past. The energy I had spent on vengeance could have been better used in finishing my project, in creating something that would stand the test of time. The skyscraper was more than just a building, it was a reflection of who I was, of the strength and resilience I had always prided myself on. It was time to focus on that, to pour my heart into my work and leave behind the bitterness that had consumed me. I knew I couldn't undo what had been done, but I could choose how to move forward. I resolved to complete my skyscraper, to make it the legacy I would leave behind. It would be a monument to my journey, not of revenge, but of redemption and growth. As for Monica and Josh, I chose to let them go. Their lives would take whatever course they would, and I would no longer be a part of it. I had learned my lesson. The pursuit of revenge had only led to pain and destruction, and it was a path I no longer wished to walk. In the end, I found peace in my work, in the creation of something beautiful and lasting. The skyscraper would be my testament to the strength that comes not from tearing others down, but from building something greater than myself. As I watched it rise, floor by floor, I knew that I had finally left the past behind, carrying with me only the lessons I had learned along the way.